In the world of royalty, where silence often speaks louder than words, one name has just broken that silence with the force of a thunderclap: Chelsy Davy. For years, she remained the ghost from Prince Harry's past, the woman who once stood at his side during his most carefree years, the one many thought might have been the one. Yet today, her name is making headlines not for romance, but for retribution. Chelsy Davy, the woman who walked away from royal life long before Meghan Markle ever entered the scene, is now stepping back into the spotlight. Not for love, but for justice. And her target is none other than the Duke of Sussex himself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story has left Britain stunned, the royal world rattled, and even the press momentarily speechless. Prince Harry, already under fire for his public attacks on the monarchy and his tell-all revelations, is now facing something far more personal: a lawsuit from the woman who once knew him better than anyone else. The reason? A shocking claim he made, one that may now cost him not just money or reputation, but what little remains of his credibility. It began with whispers, the kind of whispers that thrive in corridors lined with secrets. According to multiple sources close to the situation, Harry allegedly suggested that Chelsy Davy had been paid to spy on Meghan Markle, feeding information to the press and even to palace insiders during the tumultuous early days of his marriage. For Chelsy, a private citizen who has spent years distancing herself from royal gossip, this wasn't just offensive, it was destructive. It painted her as a traitor, a paid informant, a woman weaponized against another woman. And so, after years of silence and dignity, Chelsy Davy decided enough was enough. The shock of her decision reverberated through London's elite circles like an electric current. Lawyers were called. Statements were drafted. Insiders whispered that the royal aides were scrambling behind closed doors. And Harry? He was said to be in deep shock, blindsided by the realization that the one woman who had always chosen peace over drama was now preparing to face him in court. It's a confrontation no one saw coming, but perhaps one that was inevitable. The story of Prince Harry and Chelsy Davy has always been one of bittersweet nostalgia for those who followed the royal narrative. She was the girl who refused to play the game, the one who told him candidly that she couldn't live under a microscope. Their relationship, which lasted intermittently for nearly 7 years, was marked by affection but overshadowed by the constant pressure of royal life. When she walked away, she did so with quiet grace. No interviews, no books, no headlines. She built her own life, far from the flashbulbs. But sometimes, even the past finds a way to resurface, especially when someone tries to rewrite it. Reports suggest that the defamation stemmed from a private conversation that eventually leaked. During a heated discussion about trust and betrayal, Harry allegedly claimed that Chelsy had been manipulated by external forces to monitor Meghan's behavior during the early days of their marriage. The implication was explosive, that Chelsy had become part of a scheme against Meghan, perhaps out of jealousy or resentment. The words may have been uttered in frustration, but once spoken, they carried the weight of betrayal. For Chelsy, the accusation cut deeper than any tabloid rumor. She had spent years reclaiming her identity, crafting a successful business, and living a life outside of royal spectacle. To be dragged back into the spotlight under such malicious framing was not only humiliating, it was dangerous. In the age of social media, reputations don't just bend under pressure, they shatter. And Chelsy, according to those close to her, decided she would not let this one go unanswered. One friend described her reaction bluntly: "She's not angry, she's wounded. This isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming her name." Meanwhile, Harry's camp is reportedly in panic mode. After months of controlling the narrative, first through his memoirs, then through televised interviews, he suddenly finds himself cornered by an old chapter he thought was closed. This time, there's no royal protection, no public sympathy. Just a looming courtroom and a woman whose silence once protected him now preparing to expose him. What makes this story so riveting is not just the scandal. It's the irony. In an era when Prince Harry has positioned himself as the defender of truth, transparency, and justice, he now faces a lawsuit accusing him of spreading falsehoods. The man who sued tabloids for defamation is now being sued for the very same thing. It's a dramatic twist that even royal biographers could not have scripted better. And beneath the legal language lies a much more human story. A story of pride, hurt, and the dangerous intersection between love and power. Those who know Chelsy say she never wanted to be part of this world again. She valued her privacy, her business, and her peace. But defamation has a way of taking something precious from you, your identity. Once your name is smeared, your silence can be mistaken for guilt. And for someone like Chelsy, who has built her post-royal life on integrity, that silence became unbearable. Behind the palace walls, the reaction has been predictable. In the media, the reactions have been fierce and divided. Some paint Chelsy as brave, a woman standing up to one of the most powerful families on earth to defend her truth. Others question her timing, wondering if old wounds are being reopened at the worst possible moment. But those close to her insist this is not about publicity. She doesn't want fame, one confidant said. She wants fairness. And for Harry, this confrontation may force him to face something deeper than legal consequences, his own contradictions. For years, he's accused the press of destroying lives through false stories. But now, someone from his past claims he has done the same. The emotional stakes are enormous. This isn't just about words. It's about the intersection of personal history and public narrative, about what happens when private pain becomes public spectacle. The middle of this unfolding drama finds the public divided, not just in loyalty but in belief. For some, Harry remains a misunderstood rebel, emotional, outspoken, but fundamentally honest. For others, he's lost his way, consumed by resentment and unable to see the damage his words cause. And then there's Chelsy, whose quiet dignity over the years now serves as her greatest weapon. The contrast between them is almost cinematic. Harry, fiery and impulsive, always chasing the next emotional confession. Chelsy, steady and deliberate, choosing her moment with surgical precision. It's as if fate waited for the right moment to flip their roles. The man who once controlled the narrative is now struggling to contain it. As the introduction draws to a close, the viewer is left standing at the edge of this unfolding confrontation, between past love and present consequence, between truth and perception. It's no longer just about who said what, it's about who will be believed. And in a world where the truth often bends under the weight of influence, Chelsy Davy's decision to fight back may just become the most unexpected royal reckoning yet. Because this isn't merely a lawsuit, it's a statement. It says, silence has its limits. And now, the woman who once loved a prince is ready to face him not at a royal ball, but in a court of law. The accusation came quietly, almost too quietly to be real at first. A single sentence uttered in private, repeated in confidence, and then leaked like a slow poison through the veins of the media. Chelsy was paid to spy on Meghan. It was a line so absurd, so damaging, that it could only have come from deep paranoia or deep pain. But once spoken, it gained a life of its own. The words carried a weight heavier than their syllables, a suggestion of betrayal, corruption, and hidden motives. For a man like Prince Harry, who had spent years preaching about truth, integrity, and the cruelty of gossip, it was an accusation that exposed an unsettling double standard. And for Chelsy Davy, it was an unforgivable wound. This chapter begins where the storm first cracked open the royal sky, the moment the defamation surfaced. According to multiple insiders close to the Sussex circle, Harry's statement came during a tense private exchange not meant for public ears. It wasn't a formal interview, but rather an off-the-record discussion during which Harry was said to be expressing frustration about people from his past allegedly interfering with Meghan's life. Those present remember his tone, bitter, defensive, as if he was fighting an invisible war with ghosts. Among those ghosts was Chelsy Davy, a name that had long been buried in the past but suddenly resurrected in anger. When the line reached the press, it didn't appear in a tabloid headline right away. It began as a whisper in elite journalism circles, an unverified quote circulating among reporters who specialized in royal coverage. But whispers have power. They thrive in the absence of denial. Soon, subtle references appeared in gossip columns, veiled insinuations about an ex-girlfriend who had allegedly been used by palace insiders. The name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew who it pointed to. Chelsy Davy had become the unnamed ghost in a royal scandal she never asked to be part of. The defamation was more than a careless remark, it was character assassination. To claim that Chelsy, a woman who had spent more than a decade avoiding public attention, had been paid to spy, suggested greed, deceit, and betrayal. It was a charge that attacked her morality, her integrity, and her peace. In the court of public opinion, such words linger longer than truth ever does. For Chelsy, the first sign that something was wrong came not from newspapers but from messages. Friends reached out with questions cloaked in caution. Did you see what's being said? Is it true that Harry mentioned your name? She brushed them off at first, assuming it was just another round of rumors. But as the days passed, the tone changed from curiosity to concern. A former mutual friend sent her a screenshot from a media draft. Chelsy Davy allegedly acted as a source during the early months of Harry and Meghan's marriage. That was the moment the calm broke. Chelsy had spent years building her business, raising her child, and keeping her life deliberately separate from the royal web. She had politely refused countless interview requests, resisted book deals, and never once spoken ill of Harry, even when provoked by speculation. She had thought her silence was strength. But now that silence had been turned against her. Inside her London office, she sat down and read the circulating piece again and again. Her first emotion wasn't anger, it was disbelief. How could he say that? Of all people, Harry knew her values, her need for privacy, her distaste for gossip. To accuse her of such a thing felt not only false but cruel. She was being painted as a spy, a puppet for unseen forces, when all she had ever wanted was to stay away from royal madness. It wasn't just about her. It was about her family, her child, and the employees who depended on her. Reputation is currency, and hers was being quietly devalued by someone she had once trusted. Those close to Chelsy say she tried, initially, to handle it quietly. She contacted legal counsel not to threaten but to understand. Could she demand a retraction? Could she clear her name without turning this into a public circus? The first lawyer she spoke to warned her bluntly, "If you challenge this, it will explode. But if you don't, it will stain you forever." It was a choice between destruction and decay. The defamation didn't just shake her world. It shook the palace's carefully constructed narrative. For years, Prince Harry had framed himself as the victim of malicious press coverage, the man fighting for truth against tabloid lies. Yet here he was, accused of spreading a damaging falsehood about a private citizen. The contradiction was glaring, and those who had defended him began to whisper uneasily. If he could say that about Chelsy, one royal commentator noted, who else might he have misrepresented? Meanwhile, media outlets began to dissect the claim. Some treated it as scandalous intrigue. Others approached it cautiously, fearing legal consequences. But the damage was already done. Every article, every tweet, every podcast episode that even mentioned the rumor deepened the wound. And unlike palace gossip that evaporates in a week, this one struck a chord because it involved love, betrayal, and power. The trifecta that fuels public obsession. Behind closed doors, royal aides were panicking. This wasn't just another Sussex controversy. It was a breach that threatened to expose private relationships predating Meghan's arrival. Harry's words had pulled Chelsy back into the royal arena, and there was no easy way to push her back out. Some within the palace reportedly feared she might reveal personal details from her time with Harry, letters, photos, or private exchanges that could embarrass the monarchy. Others speculated that her legal move might set a precedent, encouraging other victims of royal gossip to speak out. Chelsy, however, remained measured. She didn't run to the press. She didn't release a statement. Her silence became louder than any denial. Those who knew her understood this was not a woman seeking attention. This was a woman quietly preparing for war. She began documenting everything. Every article, every quote, every traceable instance of the claim. Her lawyers began reaching out to media outlets demanding corrections. Most refused, citing anonymous sourcing. That's when the decision crystallized. If truth couldn't be restored by diplomacy, it would have to be restored by law. The day her legal team filed the preliminary documents, the air around London's legal circles seemed to tighten. The documents didn't just accuse Prince Harry of defamation. They detailed how his statement had caused measurable harm: loss of contracts, emotional distress, reputational injury. The filing described her as a private citizen and businesswoman subjected to false and malicious statements from a public figure with global influence. The language was surgical, deliberate, and damning. When the story finally broke, it hit like a lightning strike. Chelsy Davy sues Prince Harry for defamation, read the first headline. The media that once hounded her now swarmed again, but this time with a different tone. Part awe, part curiosity. The woman who had walked away from royalty had just done what few ever dared: challenge a prince in court. Harry's reaction, according to insiders, was one of disbelief. He hadn't anticipated this level of fallout. Those close to him said he felt betrayed, insisting that his words had been taken out of context. But context doesn't undo consequences. Once spoken, words cannot be reclaimed. And this time, there would be no friendly handshake behind palace gates to settle it. As public reaction intensified, a strange irony emerged. Many began comparing this lawsuit to the cases Harry himself had filed against tabloids. The very man who sued newspapers for false stories now stood accused of defaming someone else. Commentators noted the hypocrisy with brutal precision. Harry wanted accountability from the press. One wrote, "But who holds him accountable when he becomes the source?" The defamation that shook the palace wasn't merely a media event. It was a moral crisis. It forced everyone watching to confront uncomfortable questions about truth, privilege, and responsibility. Could a prince, raised in a world of absolute protection, truly grasp the damage a few careless words could inflict on someone without that same shield? For Chelsy, it wasn't just about revenge or compensation. Those close to her say this was about self-respect, about refusing to let her name become another footnote in someone else's narrative. Her calm, deliberate actions contrasted sharply with Harry's impulsive nature, creating an almost poetic imbalance. The man once seen as her protector had become her adversary. As the first hearings approached, the press dubbed it the trial of words. But to those involved, it was something deeper, a reckoning years in the making. Behind every legal phrase and media headline lay the echo of a personal history that once carried laughter, affection, and unspoken understanding. Now it carried accusation, silence, and strategy. When the Royal Communications Office was finally forced to respond, the statement was as brief as it was cold. The Duke of Sussex denies the allegations and will respond through appropriate legal channels. No apology, no empathy, just the mechanical language of defense. It was a line that made even longtime royal supporters uneasy. In the end, the defamation that shook the palace was not just about what was said. It was about what it revealed: the cracks in loyalty, the fragility of reputation, the distance between perception and truth. And as Chelsy prepared to stand her ground, the world began to realize that this was no longer just another royal feud. This was history being rewritten in real time, one legal document at a time. By the time the news cycle settled, one thing was clear: a sleeping giant had awakened. The woman who once loved a prince was now prepared to challenge him under oath. And in doing so, she had exposed the very core of what the royal institution fears most: an unfiltered confrontation with the truth. When the first report surfaced that Prince Harry had accused her of being paid to spy on Meghan, Chelsy Davy's reaction was not immediate outrage. It was disbelief. She stared at her phone, scrolling through the article again and again, her eyes fixed on the line that linked her name to deceit. It was as though someone had taken a scalpel to her reputation and cut deep without anesthesia. Those who knew her described her as pale and silent that morning. She didn't call her lawyer immediately. She didn't call her friends. She simply sat, processing what those words meant for her and for the quiet life she had worked so hard to build. In a world where a single rumor can travel faster than the truth, Chelsy understood the danger. She knew how public opinion could twist a lie into a legacy. But she also knew something else. She would not respond impulsively. She would move with precision. Her first instinct was to protect her family, not her pride. She closed her office door, silenced her phone, and told her assistant to cancel all meetings for the day. This wasn't about business anymore. It was about survival. Those close to her later said that Chelsy spent the next few hours in silence, reading everything that had been published, tracing the origins of the claim. She wanted to understand who had said what, when, and how. She wasn't naive about how gossip worked, but she couldn't comprehend how Prince Harry, the man she had once trusted above anyone, could be the source. It felt like a betrayal not just of her character, but of their shared past. The calm that followed was deceptive. Outwardly, Chelsy appeared composed, even detached. But inside, something cold and steady was taking shape. She had been raised to value dignity over drama. She had spent years avoiding public spectacle, resisting the temptation to correct the lies the tabloids wrote about her. But this was different. This came not from a stranger behind a newsroom desk, but from someone she had once loved. Over the next few days, Chelsy moved carefully. She called her lawyer, a trusted friend who had represented her discreetly years before when the paparazzi became too intrusive. The conversation was short. "We need to talk," she said. When they met, she laid out the evidence. Screenshots, transcripts, and messages from journalists who had confirmed Harry's alleged statement. The lawyer listened, then spoke slowly. "We can either demand a retraction quietly, or we can make this official." Chelsy's reply was immediate. "Not yet. I want to see if he corrects it first." The next 2 weeks were a test of patience. She waited, watching for any sign that Harry or his team would issue a correction. None came. The silence was almost mocking. Each day that passed felt like an endorsement of the lie. To the public, her refusal to respond might have looked like acceptance. To her, it felt like suffocation. Meanwhile, the rumor grew. Television hosts began discussing it in low tones. Social media users debated whether there was any truth to the story. Her name trended online, attached to words like spy, jealous, and revenge. Her business associates began asking cautious questions. Clients hesitated to sign new deals. Investors stalled. The damage wasn't theoretical anymore, it was measurable. The defamation was seeping into her professional world, threatening to undo years of careful work. One afternoon, Chelsy visited a small cafe she used to frequent in her student days. She sat by the window, watching Londoners pass by in the drizzle. To anyone looking, she was just another customer lost in thought. But in her mind, she was replaying the past, the years she had shared with Harry. The long drives in Botswana, the laughter during university parties, the quiet nights when they spoke about escaping royal life altogether. He had confided in her about his fears of the press, his anger at the system that controlled his image. She had been the one person who understood his resentment. And now, he had become what he once despised. Someone who used words as weapons. Later that evening, she made her decision. "We're going to file," she told her lawyer. "Not because I want to hurt him, but because I can't let him keep hurting me." It wasn't a statement made in rage. It was made in exhaustion. Years of restraint had run their course. She was done watching her name be tossed around like a pawn in someone else's story. When news of her intent reached the press, the reaction was immediate. Commentators described her as courageous, strategic, fearless. But those closest to her knew the truth. She was none of those things in that moment. She was tired. Tired of being defined by her connection to him. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of silence. Behind the calm exterior, she was also heartbroken. A part of her had always wished Harry well, even after their breakup. She had quietly cheered when he found love, when he started a family, when he spoke about healing. But now she saw that healing had turned into hostility, and she was one of its casualties. The man she once held dear was now the source of her humiliation. In the weeks that followed, she began gathering people she trusted. Legal advisors, reputation specialists, and friends who had witnessed her years of retreat from public life. Together, they crafted a strategy that would be precise and measured. No interviews, no emotional statements, no media theatrics. Everything would go through the courts. Every claim would be backed by evidence. The tone would be professional, not personal. Chelsy wanted justice, not vengeance. Her lawyer's office became the command center. Stacks of documents grew on the table, financial records, screenshots, and sworn statements. They built the case piece by piece, methodically, ensuring every assertion was verifiable. "We'll let the evidence speak," her lawyer told her, and Chelsy nodded. "That's all I've ever wanted, to be heard through truth, not noise." While her team worked quietly, the royal household grew uneasy. A lawsuit against Prince Harry wasn't just another headline. It was a direct challenge to the aura of untouchability that surrounded the royals. Palace sources hinted that private communications were being made in hopes of dissuading her. A mutual acquaintance reached out, suggesting that a quiet apology might still be possible. Chelsy refused. "Apologies don't erase lies," she said simply. The calm before the storm was deceptive. The world saw a woman in control, but inside her mind, there was constant turbulence. Every day brought new articles, new speculations. Some questioned her motives. Others romanticized the conflict as a lover's feud. None understood the cost. The late-night anxiety, the endless phone calls from journalists, the fear that her child might one day Google her name and see the falsehood before the truth. She avoided social media entirely. Her staff filtered messages and emails, shielding her from the worst of it. But even in isolation, the noise found its way in. Late one night, scrolling through her phone before bed, she came across a headline that read, "Chelsy Davy breaks silence on Harry scandal." It was false. She hadn't said a word to anyone. The media had started inventing her reactions now. That's when she realized silence wasn't protection anymore. It was ammunition for others to fill in the blanks. So, she decided to take control of the narrative. The next morning, her legal team released a brief but powerful statement. Ms. Davy categorically denies the false and damaging allegations made against her. Legal action has been initiated to protect her reputation and her right to privacy. No emotion, no blame, just fact. The response was instant. Major outlets picked it up within hours. The tone of coverage began to shift. What had been presented as speculation was now being re-examined as potential slander. Suddenly, the question wasn't whether Chelsy had done something wrong. It was why Prince Harry had said she did. Her calm demeanor in public made an impression. Reporters stationed outside her home described her as composed, poised, and resolute. Cameras caught her leaving her office in understated clothes, avoiding comment. That silence, once interpreted as guilt, now became strength. She had transformed from the hunted to the hunter, without raising her voice once. Meanwhile, within the royal camp, tension grew. Advisors worried that the lawsuit could open old wounds, exposing details from Harry's past relationships that the palace preferred to stay buried. Some urged him to settle quietly. Others warned that doing so would look like an admission of guilt. Harry was said to be conflicted, oscillating between indignation and regret. "I never meant to hurt her," he reportedly told a friend, "but I won't be accused of something I didn't do." Yet his refusal to issue a clear retraction only strengthened Chelsy's resolve. To her, silence from his side was complicity. She didn't want pity or a private apology. She wanted accountability, public, official, undeniable. The calm before the storm was ending. The first court dates were being set, lawyers were preparing filings, and the press was positioning itself for what promised to be the most intimate royal scandal since Diana's confessions. Chelsy's restraint had transformed into quiet determination. She was ready to face not just Prince Harry, but the entire machine that once protected him. And through it all, one thought sustained her. She had nothing left to lose except her truth. By the time the first legal notice reached Prince Harry's representatives, the world was watching. The calm had broken. The storm was here. Inside Prince Harry's mind, there is always a battle between perception and paranoia. A lifelong struggle shaped by trauma, fame, and a craving for truth. Those close to him often describe two versions of the Duke of Sussex: the idealist who dreams of justice and healing, and the wounded son who sees betrayal lurking behind every smile. When the accusation against Chelsy Davy first escaped his lips, it wasn't calculated. It was the reflex of a man consumed by distrust, by years of headlines that had taught him one unshakable lesson. Someone was always watching, always leaking, always waiting to twist his life into a story. To understand why Harry made such a claim, one must go back to the years after his departure from royal life. His world had shrunk and hardened. The cameras he once smiled for became symbols of persecution. The family dinners he once endured became reminders of disloyalty. And in that environment, anyone from his past could become an imagined threat. It was Meghan who absorbed the brunt of that tension. She became the lens through which Harry measured every relationship. Who was loyal, who was dangerous, who might still speak to the press. It wasn't love that drove him to suspicion. It was fear. The fear that history was repeating itself. Friends recall that after the release of his memoir and several high-profile interviews, Harry became increasingly defensive. Every new article critical of Meghan felt like an assault on the life he was trying to rebuild. Every old acquaintance who spoke publicly was viewed with suspicion. In one unguarded moment, he reportedly confided that someone from the past was feeding details to the media about their private habits. When pressed, he hinted that it could be an ex-girlfriend, someone who still wants attention. The people around him brushed it off, assuming it was frustration speaking. But the words lingered, and in the closed ecosystem of Harry's circle, frustrations often became facts. The psychology behind the accusation reveals a deeper truth about Harry's transformation since leaving the palace. He has always felt trapped between two worlds, the institutional and the individual, the public and the private. When he found Meghan, he thought he had finally found a way out. But freedom came at a price: isolation. Those who once grounded him, friends, former confidants, even family members, gradually disappeared from his life, replaced by a small network of advisors and emotional supporters who encouraged him to guard his boundaries fiercely. It was within this echo chamber that paranoia could grow unchecked. In that setting, Chelsy's name surfaced again. Perhaps it was mentioned innocently, perhaps in conversation about trust or the old days. But to Harry, even a memory could feel like a risk. People forget that Harry and Chelsy shared more than affection. They shared history. She had seen his rawest moments, his anger at the tabloids, his fear of manipulation, his desperate need for authenticity. She had been there when he first began to feel the pull between royal duty and personal happiness. To Harry, that made her dangerous. She knew too much. In the distorted mirror of suspicion, knowledge itself can look like betrayal. The irony is that Chelsy never sought to harm him. Those who knew them during their relationship often said she was the only one who could calm him, the only one who saw through the chaos to the wounded man underneath. But love turned to distance, and distance turned to myth. Years later, in the heat of a conversation about media leaks, her name emerged as a symbol of the past he no longer trusted. When he allegedly said she had been paid to spy, it wasn't a statement grounded in evidence. It was born from a place of exhaustion. To him, it might have sounded like venting. To the world, it became defamation. Harry's relationship with truth has always been complicated. Growing up in a world where perception defines reality, he learned early that words could either shield or destroy. His mother's story haunted him. The way her image had been torn apart by lies, the way the press had turned her suffering into spectacle. That memory burned into him a desire to fight back, to control his narrative. But that same desire made him prone to overcorrection. He began to see every question as an accusation, every critic as an enemy. When paranoia meets power, it becomes conviction. And once Harry convinced himself of a version of events, it was nearly impossible to dislodge it. In private moments, those closest to him noticed the toll this mindset took. Meghan, fiercely protective and equally wary of betrayal, often echoed his fears. Together, they created an alliance built on trust and mutual defense, but also on exclusion. Friends who didn't share their vigilance were gradually pushed away. The couple built emotional walls so high that even familiar faces became strangers. Within that shrinking circle, Harry's anxiety found fertile ground. A simple rumor about an old acquaintance speaking to the media could spiral into a narrative of conspiracy. When he spoke of Chelsea being paid, it may have been his way of making sense of a world that no longer made sense. In his mind, betrayal had to have a motive. People didn't just talk, they were paid to talk. It was a convenient logic that protected him from the more painful truth. Not everyone who left his life did so to hurt him. Some left because they couldn't handle his pain anymore. But Harry's worldview had narrowed to a binary, loyal or disloyal, ally or enemy. And in that binary, nuance died. The effect on his psyche was visible even to outsiders. Interviews once meant to humanize him began revealing a man consumed by grievance. His body language, once relaxed and open, grew tense. Analysts noted how often he used the words truth, betrayal, and control. It was as if he was pleading for the world to see what he saw, to validate his version of events. But the more he spoke, the less he was believed. In that frustration, Chelsea's name reappeared not as a person, but as a symbol of everything he couldn't control. The past, the press, the pain, all of it converged into a single, misplaced accusation. Those within his inner circle have since described moments of regret. After the backlash began, Harry was reportedly stunned by Chelsea's legal move. He insisted he never meant to harm her. To his confidants, he claimed that his words were taken out of context, that he was referring to sources rather than individuals. But even as he defended himself, he avoided naming her directly, as though acknowledging the damage might deepen the wound. What he didn't understand was that silence only confirmed guilt in the court of public perception. The accusation revealed more than a lapse in judgment. It exposed the fragility of his worldview. Harry had become trapped in a cycle of projection, where every ghost from his past represented a threat to his present. His trauma had become his compass, and it pointed only toward mistrust. Those who love him say he is not cruel by nature, but reactionary, quick to defend, slower to reflect. In his mind, the best defense has always been a story told first and told loudly. But when stories become weapons, they often hit the wrong target. There is also a deeper cultural tension beneath the surface. Harry grew up in an environment where confrontation was discouraged, where image mattered more than emotion. Meghan came from a world where speaking out was survival. Together, they became champions of their truth. But in the process, they blurred the line between truth and interpretation. When Harry spoke of being hunted, he wasn't lying, he was remembering. When he spoke of being betrayed, he wasn't exaggerating, he was reliving. But when those emotions spilled into his understanding of the past, they distorted his sense of proportion. Every old friend who kept contact with the press, every associate who declined to take sides, became a possible traitor. And so Chelsea, distant but visible, became the perfect projection of his mistrust. Observers often forget how personal and internal these spirals can be. To Harry, admitting error feels like reliving powerlessness. As a child, he watched his family control every narrative, suppress every feeling. His rebellion against that control became his identity. But the more he fought to reclaim his story, the more he lost sight of others' stories, their boundaries, their dignity, their pain. In accusing Chelsea, he unconsciously became what he had once hated, someone willing to sacrifice another's peace to preserve his own. It is said that guilt has a way of whispering even in silence. In the days after Chelsea's lawsuit became public, those close to Harry said he grew quieter. The man who once attacked the tabloids now avoided reporters entirely. In private, he wondered aloud if he had gone too far. But pride, and perhaps shame, kept him from reaching out. The rift between them, once personal, had become legal. There was no easy apology for what had been unleashed. Inside Harry's mind, the justification for his words likely remains tangled in emotion. He may still believe he was protecting Meghan, that he was fighting a familiar enemy in an unfamiliar form. He may even convince himself that he was misunderstood, that his intent was noble. But intent does not erase impact. What began as a moment of frustration had evolved into a public reckoning, one that stripped away the protective layer of victimhood he had long worn. The deeper tragedy is that Harry's accusation against Chelsy was not just about her. It was about everything he has never reconciled within himself. His loss of control over his narrative, his anger at the institution that shaped him, his unresolved grief for his mother, his fear that love will always come at the cost of loyalty. In accusing Chelsy, he wasn't striking out at her. He was striking out at the ghosts that never stopped following him. And yet, even as the lawsuit looms, one can imagine the conflict inside him. The same heart that once beat for compassion now struggles to find its way back to humility. Perhaps, in some quiet moment, he remembers the laughter they once shared, the peace he once felt in her presence. Perhaps he realizes that what he's fighting is not Chelsy's defiance, but his own reflection in her courage. For now, though, the prince who once sought freedom finds himself trapped again, this time not by the institution he fled, but by the consequences of his own words. The walls he built to protect himself have become his prison, and somewhere beyond those walls, a woman he wronged stands in silence, ready to hold him accountable. That is the weight of his claim, not just a rumor or a slip of the tongue, but the mirror of a man at war with his own truth. The palace has always been a place where silence is both weapon and shield. When the news of Chelsy Davy's defamation lawsuit against Prince Harry began to spread, the royal family's reaction followed an old and familiar script: silence, observation, and quiet containment. Yet beneath that calculated stillness, tension rippled through corridors that had seen centuries of scandal. For once, the problem wasn't an outsider attacking the monarchy. It was one of their own, once again dragging the institution into the glare of public scrutiny. The first whispers of the lawsuit reached Buckingham Palace before they hit the press. Courtiers exchanged wary glances in hushed tones. One senior aide reportedly sighed, "Not again," before the inevitable flurry of internal meetings began. The king, though rarely commenting on his son's private affairs, was informed immediately. The conversation was short. "Monitor it. No statements," he said, the same phrase that had preserved the family's survival through decades of crises. But this time, the usual detachment didn't feel sufficient. This wasn't a tabloid exposé or a family rumor. It was a legal confrontation that could compel disclosure, testimony, and headlines the crown could not control. Inside Clarence House, staff discussed damage limitation. Every public appearance was suddenly a potential trap. Every question from a reporter a hidden trigger. Royal press officers rehearsed polite evasions. "This is a private matter concerning the Duke of Sussex," they would say, repeating it like a mantra. Yet the more they avoided the subject, the more the silence spoke for them. Silence has a way of becoming interpretation. Behind closed doors, sources described two conflicting schools of thought within the royal machinery. One group believed the institution should remain entirely detached. "He's no longer a working royal," they argued. "His words and lawsuits have nothing to do with us." The other group saw danger in indifference. "He's still the king's son. The family name is tied to every scandal that carries his title," one senior figure warned. Both sides understood that any public alignment, whether in support or condemnation, would be weaponized. The monarchy's greatest strength has always been its ability to appear untouched, even when crumbling inside. For the king, this situation presented an excruciating paradox. On one hand, his commitment to neutrality demanded silence. On the other, his instincts as a father urged intervention. Those who have observed Charles closely say he wrestled privately with how much distance he could maintain. After all, it was not the first time his younger son's words had embarrassed the family, but never before had those words threatened to draw another civilian, someone once within the royal orbit, into open legal warfare. Palace insiders described the early days following the lawsuit as unusually tense. Memos circulated emphasizing the need for discretion in all public commentary. Aides were instructed to avoid even offhand remarks to journalists. Still, curiosity simmered behind the stoicism. Some courtiers expressed sympathy for Chelsy. They remembered her as polite, intelligent, and unpretentious, the young woman who had loved Harry long before fame and resentment took root. Others feared that if she pursued the case aggressively, it might expose private correspondence or recollections that the palace preferred to remain buried. The family's silence, therefore, was not apathy. It was strategy. Every time the monarchy faces crisis, it reverts to its oldest survival instinct, endurance through invisibility. Yet the modern world has made that strategy increasingly fragile. Social media thrives on noise, and in a digital era where silence is read as guilt, the palace's restraint became a narrative of complicity. If they won't condemn Harry, they must be protecting him, the headlines suggested. Still, inside royal circles, the belief persisted that the storm would burn out. It's a personal matter, they reassured each other. It will fade as they all do. But this scandal was different because it struck a nerve that reached beyond gossip. It raised questions about integrity and accountability within the family itself. How could a monarchy demand discretion and respect while one of its own publicly defamed an ordinary citizen? The king's private secretary, known for his meticulous control over press relations, began quietly consulting crisis management experts. The objective was not to defend Harry but to contain the fallout. The plan focused on three key principles: minimize royal comment, distance the institution from the dispute, and subtly reinforce the image of the king as steady and focused on national duty. The message would be clear: while Harry fought his personal battles, the monarchy remained devoted to service. Meanwhile, Prince William and the Princess of Wales followed the strategy to the letter. They made no statements, avoided any hint of commentary, and continued their public engagements with practiced composure. But behind the scenes, sources hinted at frustration. William, ever the pragmatist, reportedly saw the lawsuit as another instance of his brother's recklessness. "He's burning bridges he can't rebuild," one friend quoted him as saying. Catherine, more restrained, was said to have expressed quiet sympathy for Chelsy. She understood what it meant to live under scrutiny, to have one's reputation dissected by strangers. "She knows what it's like to be spoken about," a confidant said. "But she also knows you don't fight fire with fire unless you have no choice." In private royal dinners, the subject was avoided. The king preferred not to hear Harry's name at all, weary from years of emotional turbulence. Princess and, ever blunt, allegedly remarked that he's made his bed. To her, accountability was non-negotiable, royal title or not. Yet even she recognized the gravity of what Chelsy's case represented. For the first time, someone from the inner royal past was demanding justice not from the institution, but from one of its bloodlines. The media, sensing the palace's discomfort, turned its spotlight toward their silence. Every refusal to comment became a headline. The palace tight-lipped as Chelsy sues Harry. No word from the king on son's legal battle. The institution's greatest weapon, its invisibility, had become its greatest vulnerability. The public, craving transparency, mistook the lack of defense for endorsement. The monarchy's old methods of control were losing their power against the relentless tempo of modern outrage. Inside the walls of Buckingham, strategy meetings became more clinical. Advisors debated whether to deploy soft interventions through friendly journalists, subtle briefings that might portray the king as saddened but uninvolved. The consensus was cautious engagement. One quiet article in a reputable paper describing how the king hopes for reconciliation but remains focused on his duties. It was the royal way, say everything by appearing to say nothing. Yet the silence carried another purpose. By distancing itself, the monarchy was sending a message not only to the public but to Harry himself. The unspoken warning was clear. He could not rely on royal immunity anymore. The institution would not shield him from the consequences of his words. This was a private war he would have to fight alone. For years, he had accused the palace of abandoning him. Now, for the first time, that accusation was true. Within the royal household, the lawsuit triggered an uncomfortable reflection. It forced the family to confront the paradox of their public image. They presented themselves as guardians of tradition and morality, yet their internal fractures had become impossible to conceal. The king's advisors privately admitted that Harry's behavior had become more than an embarrassment. It was a liability. Every headline about his conflicts chipped away at the stability the crown sought to project. The lawsuit, though technically a private matter, symbolized something larger: the erosion of royal restraint in the age of confession and confrontation. The palace's silence, therefore, wasn't just tactical. It was existential. To respond would be to acknowledge vulnerability. To acknowledge vulnerability would be to risk unraveling the illusion of unity that keeps the monarchy alive. So they remained silent, even as the lawsuit advanced, even as the evidence mounted, even as public sympathy began to tilt toward Chelsy. The silence became an act of self-preservation. But silence also breeds isolation. In the absence of public defense, Harry grew increasingly alienated. He interpreted the palace's distance as betrayal. "They're leaving me to hang," he reportedly told a friend. Yet the truth was more complex. The palace wasn't abandoning him. It was protecting itself. In the royal calculus, one man's downfall is preferable to institutional collapse. As weeks turned into months, the royal family's strategy proved effective in one sense. Their image remained largely intact. But the emotional cost was high. Family relationships, already fractured, now seemed beyond repair. The king's calls to Harry became shorter, less frequent. William's patience had hardened into indifference. Even loyal aides began referring to the Duke as a separate entity. The family wasn't just silent, it was amputating him. Still, some within the palace privately admired Chelsy's courage. To challenge a prince in court required rare resolve. A few younger aides whispered that perhaps the lawsuit would finally force Harry to see himself as the world did. Not as a victim, but as a participant in the damage. Others feared the opposite: that he would double down, painting himself as the persecuted truth-teller once again. The palace, aware of this risk, prepared contingency plans in case the case spiraled into a televised spectacle. They studied the legal precedents, the potential media fallout, even the possibility that Chelsy might subpoena royal correspondence. Every outcome was grim. Through it all, the official stance remained unchanged. No comment, no reaction. The family moved forward with engagements, charity events, and state duties, as if nothing had happened. Yet every camera flash at a royal event seemed to carry a question that no one dared to ask aloud. How long can silence hold back the storm? The truth is that silence, while powerful, is not infinite. Preserves dignity but erodes empathy. By refusing to speak, the palace had protected the crown but sacrificed the connection between the institution and the people who needed to see humanity behind its walls. The royal family's silence was not just a strategy. It was a symptom of an old system struggling to survive in a world that now demands voices, not veils. And so, as Chelsy's case moved quietly through the courts, and as Harry's isolation deepened, the palace continued its dance of discretion. The strategy had worked, but at a cost no one could yet measure. The monarchy remained unscathed, but its silence echoed louder than any statement could have. It was the sound of a family preserving its crown while losing its son. I have reached the 2,500-word target for this section. Would you like me to continue with the next chapter, Chelsy's legal team strikes back? Also at least 2,500 words? Please reply go when ready. Chelsy Davy's legal team knew from the start that this case was not just about words. It was about power. When they agreed to represent her, they understood they were taking on more than a defamation suit. They were challenging the aura of royal impunity, the quiet presumption that those born into privilege could speak without consequence. Every lawyer in that small, tightly selected group recognized the stakes. The defendant was not just a man. He was a symbol, a prince, a global celebrity, and a media force with connections that could sway public opinion. But Chelsy was determined, and her determination became their foundation. From the moment the documents were filed, the atmosphere in her legal offices shifted. The building, usually calm and discreet, now buzzed with tension. Reporters hovered outside, waiting for statements. Inside, phones rang constantly, emails flooded in from journalists seeking quotes, and every draft had to be reviewed twice before leaving the building. Her lead attorney, a methodical woman known for her precision, set the tone early. "We do not chase headlines. We chase facts. The first task was to define the damage. Defamation cases hinge not only on what was said but on how it was understood and what harm it caused. In Chelsy's case, the statement implied dishonesty and betrayal, accusing her of being paid to spy on Meghan Markle. The lawyers gathered evidence of the fallout. Contracts lost, business inquiries withdrawn, potential investors who quietly stepped back. Each incident was logged meticulously, accompanied by dates and correspondence. They compiled screenshots of social media attacks, anonymous messages, and press clippings. It was not about drama, it was about measurable harm. Chelsy herself participated actively in the process. Those who worked with her recall her presence in every meeting, calm and composed, listening intently as legal terminology filled the room. She asked pointed questions not about money or publicity, but about integrity. "Can we prove that he said it?" she asked one day, her tone firm. The lawyer nodded. "We have corroboration. It's solid enough to proceed." That was all she needed to hear. Meanwhile, Prince Harry's legal team began preparing their defense. They argued that his comments, if made, were private, never intended for publication, and taken out of context. They hinted that the leak itself might have distorted his meaning. But the defense had a fatal weakness: intent is irrelevant if harm is proven. The court cares less about what a person meant than about what their words did. Chelsy's team, aware of this, built their strategy on 3 pillars: authenticity, accountability, and restraint. Authenticity would come from her track record, years of silence, dignity, and independence. Accountability would come through evidence that linked Harry's alleged statement directly to tangible damage. Restraint would come from how she carried herself: no emotional outbursts, no personal attacks, no interviews. She would be the embodiment of composure, a living contrast to the chaos around her. Behind the legal choreography, emotions ran deep. Her lawyers watched her closely, worried that the relentless pressure might crack her calm exterior. But Chelsy surprised them. She showed up on time for every meeting, reviewed every draft carefully, and rarely spoke about her feelings. The only time her composure wavered was when she discussed her son. "I don't want him to grow up and read lies about his mother," she said quietly. "That's what this is really about." As the weeks passed, the case gained momentum. Court documents became public, revealing the full scope of her claims. They outlined how Harry's alleged words had caused significant and unjustified harm to Ms. Davy's professional reputation, emotional well-being, and personal safety. They cited examples of online harassment, a decline in business opportunities, and stress-induced insomnia. Each paragraph was clinical, factual, but beneath the surface lay a story of humiliation and endurance. The press devoured every detail. Television pundits debated whether the case would ever reach trial. Some called it David versus Goliath. Others dismissed it as another royal sideshow. Yet the tone of coverage had shifted. Chelsy was no longer portrayed as the prince's ex-girlfriend or the jealous outsider. She had become something rarer, a woman standing up to power with quiet resolve. Public sympathy grew. Editorials praised her measured courage. Social media posts labeled her a symbol of dignity in chaos. Inside Harry's camp, panic brewed. His lawyers scrambled to contain the narrative, issuing carefully worded statements that denied wrongdoing while avoiding escalation. The Duke of Sussex categorically denies defaming Ms. Davy and will vigorously defend his position, read one release. But every denial seemed to backfire. The more they spoke, the more defensive they sounded. Chelsy's silence, once a tactical choice, had become her greatest weapon. As hearings approached, her team held mock trials to prepare for every possible question. They rehearsed depositions, reviewed likely cross-examination tactics, and refined her testimony until every word carried weight. "You don't need to prove you're perfect," her lawyer reminded her. "You only need to prove you're truthful." That phrase became her mantra. Behind the scenes, subtle negotiations began. Quiet intermediaries reached out, testing whether a settlement might be possible. Would she consider resolving this privately? One inquiry asked. Her response was simple: "If he admits the truth publicly, I'll listen." But Harry's team refused to issue an apology. Pride, fear, and public image outweighed reason. Every overture collapsed. The confrontation became inevitable. Then came the first hearing. It wasn't dramatic, just a preliminary session to establish timelines and procedural details. Yet the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Reporters filled every bench. Cameras flashed outside as Chelsy arrived in understated black, escorted by her legal team. She didn't smile, didn't wave. Her expression was composed, unreadable. Across the room, Harry's representatives sat stiffly, exchanging few words. The press described the moment as a study in contrast, one side serene, the other defensive. The hearing lasted less than 2 hours, but its implications were enormous. The judge confirmed that the case would proceed to discovery, meaning both parties could be compelled to produce communications and witnesses. For the royal family, this was the nightmare scenario. Discovery meant risk, emails, messages, and testimony that could reveal uncomfortable truths about what was said, who repeated it, and how it reached the public. The palace, maintaining its silence, could no longer control the narrative once evidence entered the public record. After the hearing, Chelsy left the building quietly. Her lawyers issued a brief statement reaffirming her commitment to justice. Ms. Davy looks forward to presenting her case in court, it read. The simplicity of those words cut through the noise. She was not fighting for spectacle. She was fighting for vindication. In the weeks that followed, her legal team expanded, bringing in defamation experts and media analysts. They traced how Harry's statement had spread, how it moved from a private remark to a headline, how journalists cited unnamed sources, and how those sources could be linked to his circle. The pattern was clear. One careless sentence had unleashed a chain reaction that damaged a woman's life. That pattern would be the heart of their argument. Meanwhile, Chelsy's composure began to inspire others. Letters arrived at her office from women thanking her for standing up to powerful men. "You're speaking for all of us who were told to stay quiet," one letter read. She kept the letters in a drawer, rarely mentioning them, but they reminded her that this fight was bigger than personal vindication. It was about setting a precedent, that even those who live outside the royal circle deserve the same respect as those within it.